Okay, then just remember that this has to be 12-0 either way. That's the law. Okay, are we ready? Now, all those voting guilty, please raise your hands. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay, that's 11 guilty.
How biased are you? In 1951, a psychologist conducted a crucial experiment. He put each participant with 7 other Confederates, or undercover actors posing as participants. The experimenter provided a very simple question with an obvious answer. Which line is similar in length to this line? A, B, or C? The answer was quite obviously B. But the Confederates were instructed to say one obviously wrong answer out loud. So, when it came to the real participants, the choice was obvious. B. Except it wasn't. On average, about 1/3 of the participant responses conformed to the group by saying the obviously wrong answer. Over the 12 critical trials, about 75% of the participants conformed at least once, and only 25% never conformed. To give you a clear idea, when the Confederates were removed, less than 1% of the participants gave the wrong answer. This was the famous Asch conformity experiment, and its findings about conformity and human nature shocked the world. But what does this tell us about humans? What does it say about society, objectivity, and truth? What we just learned about is a type of bias called conformity bias. It refers to our tendency to take social cues for proper behavior instead of trusting our own judgments. It's quite similar to what you may know as peer pressure or even societal pressure. What is bias, though? Why do we have it? And is it good or bad for us? Bias generally refers to a tendency or inclination to something or someone. One might be, for example, biased towards a certain political party or a religion or an idea. Similarly, cognitive bias could be defined as a systematic error in cognition, which could include thinking, understanding, judging, or remembering. It's basically when the way you think, perceive, or remember is wrong. The way biases manifest in your life could be how you're more likely to trust someone who's well-dressed or pretty, or how you think you're smarter than you actually are, or how you think you can cram for your exam the night before. Here's a hint: you probably can't. Here are a few types of biases most of us have on a daily basis. Number 1, confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is the tendency to listen more often to information that confirms our existing beliefs. And this new information only strengthens and reinforces the existing beliefs we have. So, for example, a liberal will mostly listen to liberal narratives, and a Christian will mostly read Christian books, and an Einstein-loving physicist will most likely look for proof of his theories. This bias might also include refusing to listen to other perspectives, only believing and trusting evidence and research that confirms our beliefs, and specifically looking for supporting proof. And this type of bias is one of the reasons why it's generally very hard for people to change their beliefs and views. Confirmation bias is thought to happen to protect one's self-esteem and is due to limitations of the mind. Number 2, hindsight bias. Hindsight bias is the tendency to see events as more predictable than they actually are, after the fact. It's also referred to as the I knew it all along phenomenon. An example of this is when your friend insists that they knew all along what football team was going to win, or when you say you knew your ex wasn't the one only after breaking up, and so on. Hindsight bias occurs due to several reasons, including misremembering events and believing all events are somewhat predictable. Number 3, self-serving bias. Self-serving bias is the tendency to give oneself credit for success but attribute one's failure to external factors. For example, when you pass a test, you'll think you're smart, hardworking, and you've studied well. However, when you fail a test, the teacher was unfair, the questions were too hard, and something was wrong. But not you. When in fact, it's quite possibly because you didn't study enough, or history is just not your cup of tea. Self-serving bias serves as protection for self-esteem. Number 4, the Dunning-Kruger effect. The Dunning-Kruger effect is the tendency to overestimate one's intelligence and capability. According to this effect, people with low competence tend to be overconfident about their abilities. But the more their competence increases, the more they're fully aware of it. For example, not knowing how to sail a boat. It might seem easy and doable to an extent, but when you start learning about it, you'll realize it's not as easy and doable. Then you'll learn more and you'll be fully aware of your competence while knowing your limitations. This effect might be due to one's own lack of intelligence and capability. Basically, you can't know what you don't know until you know. Number 5, availability heuristic. The availability heuristic is the tendency to estimate the probability of an event based solely on the readily available examples in mind. For example, you might think that dropping out of school is a good move because others have done it and it worked. But the chances of becoming the next Bill Gates or Mark Zuckerberg are extremely slim. Furthermore, we all have a fear of sharks, despite the extremely low numbers of deaths by sharks. Meanwhile, we underestimate the probability of being killed by lightning, even though it's higher than the probability of being eaten by sharks. It's all about the examples that readily come to mind. The availability heuristic serves as a mental shortcut to save both time and mental energy. Okay, but why does this happen anyway? Can we as humans ever be unbiased? Generally, bias happens because of the ways our cognitive system works. More specifically, here are some reasons. Number 1, power and attention limitations. As humans, we have limited mental power and attention, so we are constantly in the process of deciding what's worth our time and cognitive energy. So in some aspects, we inevitably end up having limitations and shortcomings in the form of bias. This is based on what's called the dual process theory. This theory that tries to explain how we think says that we have two thinking systems or processes. The first is intuitive, quick, automatic, and effortless, while the second is conscious, slow, controlled, and effortful. Because we can't think about everything slowly and consciously, we tend to use the first system or process, and well, sometimes it makes mistakes. For example, one might mistake someone for a friend because they were not paying attention. Number 2, heuristics, mental shortcuts. As a result of the dual process, our brains adapt to have certain mental shortcuts. Instead of using a lot of mental energy for every situation, we make use of generalizations and quick conclusions in order to save energy and time. For example, one might believe all mushrooms are poisonous, when in fact only a few species are. Number 3. Social pressure. As demonstrated in the Asch conformity experiment, people might become biased due to social pressure and the need to fit in or be right in the eyes of society. Conformity in the Asch experiment is theorized to be due either to 1. Normative conformity, which is the need to be a part of a group and not be rejected, or 2. Informational conformity, which is the need to have accurate information. In the first case, one conforms just to be accepted, while in the second case, one internalizes the group's information and actually believes it to be true. There are other factors that contribute to cognitive bias, such as individual motivations, emotions, age, and culture. One might be biased because of their own self-interests, such as earning money, having success, or preserving one's self-esteem. Or one might be biased against something or someone because they're angry, scared, or jealous. Some biases protect our self-esteem, while other biases come from deep-seated beliefs or our inability to remember something correctly. Generally, cognitive biases increase with age as cognitive flexibility decreases, and cultures can even contribute to biases one might have. So what do we do with all this knowledge? What does this all mean? Well, as humans, we are always in the process of trying to understand ourselves and the world around us. So we have certain ways of thinking and organizing information in our heads, ways that help us survive. Sometimes the ways we think turn out to be wrong or misguided, but that doesn't mean we're condemned to an eternal life of bias. It's good to remember that bias is a very human thing. We can't avoid it completely, but what we can do is first acknowledge that we're biased and be aware of the times and places we're being biased. When we become aware of the possibility of being biased, we have to hold ourselves accountable and distance ourselves to get a clearer, more objective view. We can do that by identifying and considering the factors that make us biased, whether it's self-interest or emotions, and trying to minimize or eliminate their effects. And lastly, we may challenge our biases by asking ourselves the necessary questions. What factors am I missing? Am I giving too much weight to certain factors? What relevant information could I be ignoring? At the end of the day, we may never eliminate bias from our lives. But in the least, we may learn to live with it and rise above it. Thanks for watching, and remember to like and subscribe.